The cards had always been kind to me, until they weren't. I've spent 45 years letting fate guide my calloused hands across countless poker tables, taking what I could and leaving before sunrise, never staying, never building, never caring about the men whose money filled my pockets. Then came that night in Copper Creek, when Richard Sterling's strange smile haunted me even as I won his ranch. "The property's yours," he'd said, eyes cold as Montana winter, "though I reckon you'll find it more complicated than appears on paper." I didn't know then that those words would lead me to a young woman with fierce green eyes standing on a porch with a rifle, to corrupt lawmen with silver stars bought and paid for, to midnight explosions in ancient caves, and eventually to the choice that would finally force this old gambler to play for something more valuable than money. Some men spend their whole lives searching for the perfect hand, never realizing the best games aren't about the cards you're dealt, but about what you're willing to risk to protect what matters. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. The cards fell exactly where they needed to. I stared at the worn deed in my weathered hands, still warm from Richard Sterling's desperate grip moments before. My name is Hope Callahan, and at 45 years old, I'd spent most of my life moving from one dusty town to another, letting fate guide me through countless poker games across the frontier. But tonight was different. I'd won Whispering Pines Ranch in a high-stakes game in the small mining settlement of Copper Creek, Montana Territory, 1885. Something felt wrong about the way Sterling had smiled when he lost everything. And the man should have been broken, yet his eyes held secrets that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Congratulations," Sterling muttered, tipping his hat. "The property's yours, though I reckon you'll find it more complicated than appears on paper." The saloon's smoky air hung thick with tension as the other players shifted uncomfortably. Sterling was a known businessman from back east, not some desperate fool gambling away his livelihood. His too-easy surrender left me suspicious. Sheriff Holloway approached after Sterling departed. "You're riding into trouble. Callahan, that land's got history. Bloody history." "All land has history out here," I replied, tucking the deed safely into my vest pocket. "Some say it's cursed. The last 3 owners met untimely ends." He lowered his voice. "And there's rumors about a girl who refuses to leave, claiming the land belongs to her family. Ghosts don't scare me, Sheriff. Living folks with grudges might. It ain't ghosts you should worry about," he said, turning away. "It's the living who carry the heaviest debts." 3 days later, I approached Whispering Pines Ranch as the golden Montana sunset bathed the landscape. Rolling hills surrounded a valley where a modest but well-built ranch house sat nestled against towering pines, smoke rising from its chimney. My horse, Mercy, sensed my apprehension as we crossed the boundary marked by a weathered wooden sign nearly overtaken by wild roses. I dismounted at the porch steps, noting the well-maintained fences despite their age, the organized woodpile, and a small herb garden. My boots fell heavy on the worn planks that spoke of decades of use. Through the partially open door, a woman's voice hummed a melody that triggered an unexpected memory of my own mother. I knocked twice. The humming stopped abruptly. Footsteps approached, and the door swung wide to reveal a young woman, no older than 25, with auburn hair tied back in a practical knot. Her fierce green eyes studied me with undisguised suspicion. She wore a simple but well-mended blue dress, her hands roughened by hard work. But she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. "You must be lost, mister," she said, her voice steady, despite the surprise flickering across her features. I removed my hat. "Name's Hope Callahan. According to this—" I pulled out the deed. "I'm the new owner of Whispering Pines." Her expression hardened instantly into something resembling forged steel. "My name is Sara Blackwood, and there's been a mistake. This ranch isn't for sale, and it never was." Richard Sterling had no right to bet what wasn't his. I studied the deed in the fading light, confirming its legal validity with official territorial stamps. Every line appeared legitimate, every marking in place. Yet this woman stood before me with absolute conviction. "According to this document, ma'am, I own everything from Bitter Creek to the Eastern Ridge. That includes this house." I kept my voice calm, though tension crept into my shoulders as I realized this wouldn't be the simple transition I had anticipated. Sara stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her with deliberate force. "Then you'll have to take it from me, Mr. Callahan, because I'm not leaving. This land belongs to my family, and I have proof that makes your paper worthless." The sunset cast long shadows across the porch as we faced each other, neither willing to back down. I'd come expecting to claim my prize, a fresh start after years of wandering, but instead found myself in a standoff with a woman who seemed prepared to fight for something she believed was rightfully hers. "May I come in? Seems we've got matters to discuss," I said, replacing my hat. Her eyes narrowed, assessing me. "You can wait in the barn. I don't invite strangers into my home. It's getting cold, and we both know this conversation needs to happen." Something in my tone must have convinced her. "Fine, but leave your gun on the porch." Inside, the ranch house was modest but well kept. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting warm light over simple furniture that had been lovingly maintained. Photographs hung on the walls, a family I presumed was hers, alongside a rifle mounted within easy reach. "You mentioned proof," I said, accepting the cup of coffee she reluctantly offered. Sara moved to a wooden chest in the corner and produced a stack of yellowed papers. "My grandfather, Joseph Blackwood, established this ranch in '61, before the war. He brought my grandmother here from Boston against her family's wishes." Her voice carried pride mixed with bitterness. "When he died in '78, the ranch passed to my father, William." She laid out documents, land grants, certificates, letters. "My father took ill 3 years ago. Richard Sterling was his doctor, claimed to be from back east with new treatments. Father trusted him. Let me guess. Expensive treatments?" Sara's jaw tightened. "Sterling convinced my father he needed specialized medicines only available through his connections. Over time, Father signed over portions of our land to cover the mounting costs." Her hands trembled slightly. "He died anyway." "The treatments were nothing but colored water and false hope, and Sterling ended up with claim to the property," I finished. "Not legally. My father wasn't in his right mind when he signed those papers. Sterling took advantage of a dying man." She produced another document. "This is my father's true will, witnessed by Pastor Mitchell before Sterling arrived. It leaves everything to me." I examined the will. The date preceded the land transfers Sterling had used to claim ownership. If authentic, it could invalidate my deed. "Why hasn't the territorial court settled this?" I asked. Sara's bitter laugh held no humor. "Sterling has friends in the territorial offices. Judge Patterson refuses to hear my case. The sheriff's in his pocket. I've been fighting for 2 years, while Sterling tried different ways to remove me." Before I could respond, hoofbeats approached outside. Sara tensed, reaching for the rifle. "Are you expecting company?" I asked. Moving to the window, her face went pale. "That's Sheriff Burke. Sterling must have told him you'd be coming." Sheriff Burke dismounted with practiced ease, flanked by two deputies who looked more like hired muscle than lawmen. Burke's weathered face bore the confident expression of a man accustomed to getting his way. The silver star on his chest gleamed in the last light of day, a symbol of authority often wielded like a weapon in these remote territories. "You'd better let me handle this," I said, retrieving my gun from the porch. Sarah's hand on my arm stopped me. "Be careful. Burke has a reputation for solving problems permanently." I stepped onto the porch as Burke approached. "Evening. Sheriff. Hope Callahan. I believe Sterling might have mentioned me." Burke's cold eyes assessed me like a predator sizing up potential prey. "Mr. Callahan. Doctor. Sterling sent word you'd be arriving. Said there might be some difficulty with the transition of property." I kept my hands visible and relaxed, showing no threat. "No difficulty on my end, Sheriff. I have the legal deed to this property." I produced the document. Noting how Sara tensed beside me, Burke examined it with practiced thoroughness. "Everything appears to be in order." He folded the paper and handed it back. "Miss Blackwood, you've been given fair notice. Time to pack your belongings and move along." "This is my home," Sara said, her voice trembling with barely controlled rage. "I was born in this house. My family built this ranch with their own hands, and Richard Sterling stole it through fraud and deception." "That's a serious accusation," Burke replied, but his tone suggested he'd heard this story before. "Do you have documentation to support your claim?" Sarah's silence stretched too long, and I saw defeat creep into her posture. The will she'd shown me wasn't enough against Sterling's influence. "I thought so," Burke continued. "Pack your things. I won't ask again." "Wait," I found myself saying. "What if I choose to let her stay? It's my property now, according to this deed." Burke's eyes hardened. "That wouldn't be wise. Mr. Callahan, Miss Blackwood has a history of causing trouble for property owners. The last man, who tried to be charitable, ended up with his barn burned down and his cattle scattered across 3 counties. Sara whirled on the sheriff. "That's a lie. Jacob Henderson was drunk and knocked over his own lantern. Everyone in Copper Junction knew it, but you needed someone to blame." "The point is," Burke said, ignoring her outburst, "some people attract misfortune. You'd be smart to start fresh without complications." I studied the faces around me, reading the undercurrents of old conflicts and buried secrets. Something had happened in this valley that went deeper than property disputes. The sheriff wanted Sara gone with an urgency that seemed personal. "I'll need time to consider my options," I said carefully. Burke's hand drifted toward his gun. "Time is something Miss Blackwood ran out of months ago. She leaves today, or I'll remove her myself." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. I realized I was about to be forced into a choice that would define everything that happened next. "She stays until I decide otherwise," I said, stepping between Sara and the sheriff. "This is my property now, and I'll run it as I see fit." Burke's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Callahan. A big one." "Maybe, but it's mine to make." Burke swung back into his saddle with movements sharp as broken glass. "But when trouble comes calling, don't expect any help from my office." "And Callahan, that deed might be legal, but it doesn't tell the whole story. You might want to ask Miss Blackwood about her father and why he really lost this place." Sara stood frozen on the porch, her face pale as fresh snow. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You shouldn't have done that. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into." Then explain it to me, I said, turning to face her. Start with your father and why Burke thinks his story matters. We moved back inside as darkness fell. Sara stoked the fire, the flames casting shadows that danced across her troubled face. Her hands trembled as she poured whiskey into 2 cups. My father wasn't just sick in body, she began, her voice low. After Mother died from fever in '80, something in him broke. He started drinking, making poor decisions. She took a long sip from her cup. Sterling didn't just show up by chance. He came because he knew about the coal deposits in the Eastern Ridge. Coal? I repeated, suddenly understanding why someone would go to such lengths to acquire this seemingly ordinary ranch. She nodded. Government surveyors found it 2 years before Father fell ill. Sterling learned about it through his connections in the territorial capital. He didn't come here as a doctor. He came as a vulture, circling dying prey. But why didn't your father sell the mineral rights if he needed money? Because he knew what mining would do to this valley. The streams that water our cattle would be poisoned. The forests where we hunt would be cleared. Her eyes reflected the firelight with fierce intensity. This land wasn't just property to him. It was our heritage, our future. So Sterling found another way to get it, I concluded, through medical treatments your father couldn't afford. Sterling claimed his treatments could cure Father's consumption. When Father couldn't pay, Sterling suggested he could work off the debt by signing over small parcels of land. Her voice hardened. Each time Father seemed to improve. Then, mysteriously, worsened, requiring more expensive remedies. You're suggesting Sterling was poisoning him? Sara's knuckles whitened around her cup. I have no proof, but I know what I saw. Father would improve when Sterling was away, then decline rapidly after his visits. You confronted Sterling? Father forbade it. He still believed Sterling was helping him. Her voice broke slightly. By the time Father realized he'd been deceived, he'd signed away most of our land. That's when he changed his will, ensuring Sterling couldn't take the house and remaining acres. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the night. Sara tensed, moving to the window. Burke again? I asked, reaching for my gun. No, she whispered. Worse. Those are Sterling's men. Through the window, I counted 6 riders approaching from the eastern ridge, moving with purpose. The moonlight revealed rifles slung across their backs, and the determined set of their shoulders. They've come for the deed, Sara said. Sterling must have realized you might sympathize with me. I checked my revolver. How many bullets do you have for that rifle? Not enough. Her voice was grim. There's a cellar beneath the kitchen. A tunnel leads to the creek bed. You should go. And leave you here alone. Not likely. She turned to me, surprise evident in her expression. Why would you stay? This isn't your fight. I thought about my life, decades of drifting, taking what I could through skill and luck, never putting down roots or standing for anything beyond my own survival. For once, the path seemed clear. Maybe it should be, I said. I'm tired of men like Sterling taking what isn't theirs. The eastern ridge rose like a black wall against the star-filled sky as Sara and I moved through the shadows. We'd left the house dark, creating the illusion it was empty. Sterling's men would find no easy target there. The main tunnel entrance is just ahead, Sara whispered, leading me through a narrow ravine. The caverns run beneath half the ridge. Father mapped them years ago. The plan was simple but dangerous. We would use our knowledge of the terrain against Sterling's hired guns. The dynamite would serve not to harm, but to confuse and frighten, to make 6 men believe they faced a much larger force. "They're splitting up," I observed as we reached our vantage point. 3 approaching the house, 3 circling toward the barn. Sara nodded, just as I expected. Sterling always divides his forces. There was something in her tone, a familiarity with Sterling's tactics, that suggested this wasn't the first confrontation. The leader of Sterling's men dismounted in the yard, his scarred face visible in the moonlight. "That's Marcus Kane," Sara whispered. "Sterling's enforcer, ex-cavalry turned mercenary. The man has a reputation for efficient violence." "Search the house and barn," Kane ordered his men. "Find the deed and the girl. Carter wants both undamaged." "Carter?" I questioned softly. "Richard Sterling's real name," Sara explained. "Everything about the man is built on lies." We watched as Kane's men approached the house, weapons ready. The moment they entered, Sara nodded to me. I lit the first fuse and tossed the dynamite stick into a ravine far from any of the men, but close enough to create chaos. The explosion echoed across the valley like thunder, sending Kane's men scrambling for cover. Before they could recover, Sara triggered a prepared rock slide that blocked the main path back to their horses. "Ambush!" one of the men shouted, firing blindly into the darkness. "Make for the trees," Kane commanded, displaying the calm of a seasoned fighter. I lit a second charge, placing it to drive them away from their intended escape route and toward the box canyon Sara had chosen as our trap. Gunfire erupted as Kane's men shot at shadows, wasting ammunition on imagined attackers. Sara and I fired selective shots from different positions, creating the illusion of multiple assailants. "Circle around." She disappeared into the darkness with the practiced stealth of someone who knew every rock and tree. I continued my part, using the terrain to project my voice from different directions, confusing our opponents about my location and numbers. "You're surrounded, Kane." "Show yourself, coward," Kane returned. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Another explosion, this one from Sara's position, sent 2 of Kane's men running directly into the box canyon. The others, including Kane, followed, believing it was their only escape route. As planned, Sara had circled behind them, blocking the canyon's entrance with a final controlled rock slide. Not enough to harm, but sufficient to trap. "Your situation is simple," I called down from the ridge above them. "You're caught between rock walls with no way out except through us. We have the high ground and more explosives than you have bullets." Kane's scarred face contorted with rage as he searched the darkness for a target. "Whatever Sterling's paying you, Callahan, I'll double it." "This isn't about money," I replied. "It's about justice." "Justice?" Kane laughed bitterly. "You're a gambler, not a lawman. What do you care about some woman's claim to worthless land? It's not worthless, and we both know it." Sara called from her position. "Tell Sterling his mining schemes end here." Kane's expression shifted from anger to calculation. "So you know about the coal. Clever girl. But do you know about the gold?" I exchanged a glance with Sara, whose surprised expression matched my own. "That's right," Kane continued, sensing our confusion. "Sterling's geologist found traces in the North Creek last month. This valley isn't just sitting on coal. It's on a gold deposit that could rival the strikes in California. That deed you're holding, Callahan, worth 100 times what you won at that poker table." The revelation hung in the air between us. If true, it explained Sterling's elaborate schemes and persistent pursuit of the property. It also meant the danger had just increased exponentially. "Lower your weapons," I commanded. This ends tonight." "It's already ended," Kane replied with sudden confidence. "You've played your hand too early." The crack of a rifle shot echoed from behind us, and I felt a searing pain in my shoulder as the impact knocked me from my position. Sara cried out in alarm, turning to face this new threat. From the shadows emerged more men, at least a dozen, led by Sheriff Burke himself. Sterling had anticipated our resistance and prepared accordingly. "Drop your weapons," Burke called, "or the next shot goes through your head. Callahan." Sara fired at the newcomers, buying me time to scramble to better cover despite my wounded shoulder. Blood soaked my shirt as I struggled to assess our deteriorating situation. "We need to reach the main cavern," Sara said, appearing beside me. "There's another way out." "You go," I said, pressing a hand to my bleeding shoulder. "I'll hold them off." "Don't be a fool," she hissed, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind my wound. "We either escape together or die together. I'm done running from these men." The determination in her eyes left no room for argument. With her help, I got to my feet, and we retreated deeper into the network of caves as bullets splintered rock around us. I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then the pain in my shoulder brought everything rushing back. The confrontation in the caves, Sterling's burial under collapsed rock, our desperate escape. "Good morning," Sara said, entering the room with a steaming cup. "I was beginning to think you'd sleep another day away." "How long?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. 3 days. "The doctor from Pine Ridge said you were lucky. The bullet went clean through muscle without hitting bone." She helped me sit up, placing pillows behind my back. "He also said you're the stubbornest patient he's treated since old Hank Jenkins survived that bear attack in '79. I took the offered coffee, welcoming its warmth and strength. "What happened after the caves?" Sara sat on the edge of the bed, her face showing the weariness of someone who hadn't rested properly in days. Marshal Turner and his deputies arrived from the territorial capital the morning after. Apparently, someone in the governor's office had been investigating Sterling for fraud across 3 territories. "William Henderson," she explained, "before leading Burke's men astray. He took one of our horses and rode through the night to fetch the marshal. Said he couldn't live with another death on his conscience. And Burke? Arrested, along with most of his deputies. They found Sterling's ledger in his office, detailed records of bribes and arrangements dating back years." She shook her head in disgust. Half the county officials were involved. "What about Sterling's body?" "Still buried under tons of rock. The marshal said recovery would be too dangerous." Her expression showed little remorse. "They did find something interesting while examining the cave entrance, though. Gold traces in the rock, significant ones. Sterling wasn't lying about that." "The deed?" I remembered suddenly. "You still have it?" Sara reached into her pocket and produced the worn document. Marshal Turner authenticated it. Despite Sterling's manipulation, the transfer to you was legally executed and witnessed. She placed it on the bedside table. "Whispering Pines is rightfully yours, Mr. Callahan." I stared at the deed for a long moment. After a lifetime of temporary possessions and transient connections, I now owned something of genuine value, not just monetary, but historical and personal, a place with roots and meaning. "What will you do now?" I asked Sara. "The ranch is big enough for 2 people, she said quietly. "If you're serious about earning something honest, I could use help rebuilding what this place used to be." I looked into her eyes and saw not charity, but opportunity. A chance to become the kind of man who built things instead of just taking them For the first time in years, the future stretched ahead of me, filled with possibility rather than just the next game. I'd be honored to help, I said, and meant every word. In the quiet moments between dusk and darkness, we find our truest selves. The American frontier wasn't just a place of sweeping landscapes and desperate struggles. It was where souls were tested against the unyielding crucible of necessity. Those who wandered without purpose eventually discovered that freedom without meaning is its own kind of prison. Sometimes life deals us hands we never asked for. The true measure of character lies not in the cards we're dealt, but in how we play them, whether we fold under pressure or stand firm when justice hangs in the balance. The deed to one's integrity cannot be gambled away or stolen through deception. The gold that matters most isn't found in creek beds or mountain veins. It resides in the courage to defend what's right, in partnership built on mutual respect, and in the decision to finally put down roots after a lifetime of drifting. The most valuable claims we stake are not on land, but on principles worth defending and people worth standing beside. Thank you for joining us for this journey through Montana's rugged heart. If this story touched something in your own spirit, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit that built America. Until next time, may your own journey lead you home